Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us live for this latest NIHR Academy Development and Support webinar, Being at Your Best. Please use the Q&A box throughout the webinar to post any questions you might have. You can also upvote any questions you particularly want to see answered by using the thumbs up icon. Zoom will automatically share a link to the evaluation survey when you leave the webinar. This will give you a chance to provide your feedback on the session, which we would very much appreciate. You can also request a copy of the webinar slides by providing your email address in the evaluation survey, though your responses will remain anonymous. This part of the webinar won't be included in the recording shared on YouTube, so please forgive me as I need to do an official introduction. I really hope you enjoy the session. Welcome everyone to the latest in a series of development and support webinars delivered by the NIHR Academy. My name is Lucy and I work at the NIHR Academy as the Senior Development and Support Manager. This webinar, Being at Your Best, is delivered in conjunction between the NIHR Academy and Capfinity, our leadership programme partners, and will be facilitated by Jean Burke. Jean has over 25 years experience working at a senior level in change management, communications and employee engagement. Jean has worked with NHS executives, clinicians, healthcare professionals and their teams to help them perform at their best and deliver better outcomes. Jean, I'll now hand over to you.
Many thanks, Lucy, and can I extend my welcome to everybody on this webinar today. I'm really looking forward to being with you today and talking about what it means to be at your best at work. And my starting point for our conversation today is about what does being at your best mean? And I want to suggest that the starting point for this is about having high levels of self-awareness. Because if we know ourselves well, we understand and will really appreciate what drives us, how others see us, what we look like when we're performing well, and what motivates us, as well as what interests us. So self-awareness these days, from a leadership point of view, is perceived as a meta skill for the 21st century. And what I want to share with you today is a little bit more detail on what it means to be self-aware, to think about the components that make up self-awareness, because there are several, and also think about what you may have heard around and about your workplace and elsewhere, the concept of personal brand. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we will finish by thinking about 3 or 4 things that can help us raise our levels of self-awareness. I wanted to start firstly with a statistic that I have on the screen right now. And the statistic comes from some research by a lady called Tasha Eurich, who's an organizational psychologist and researcher in the US. And she did a big piece of research in 2016 into what it means to be self-aware these days. And one of the really striking statistics she came up with was that when she spoke to people and undertook research with people, 95% of them reported that they believed that they were self-aware. However, when she looked at some of the self-disclosed questionnaires that people had completed and observed the behaviors that would indicate self-awareness, the real number was closer to 15%. So that's quite significant, isn't it? 95% of people believing they're self-aware, the reality of it being it's 15%. And I'm sure if we were sitting around and having a conversation today about our own levels of self-awareness, we're bound to rate them fairly highly rather than low. The invitation today is just for a bit of further reflection around that, to think about, actually, if I'm saying I'm self-aware, how true or untrue is that? So there will be moments throughout our 45 minutes or so together today where I will invite you to reflect, maybe to capture something in the chat, but I really encourage you to start to think about your own levels of awareness as we go through this webinar today. So building on Tasha's research in 2016, she identified that there are two different types of self-awareness. There is what we will call internal self-awareness, which is about being aware of our strengths, our weaknesses, our values, and understanding why we behave the way we do. And then there's external self-awareness, which is about staying aware of how others perceive us and our behaviors. And the curious and interesting part of this is that it may be different than we intend it to be. And I'm going to come back to that later. So Tasha's research suggests that there is real value in understanding and having a greater level of internal self-awareness and external self-awareness, because combined, if these levels are high, then we're going to build stronger relationships in the workplace. We're going to have increased levels of trust and job satisfaction. And overall, we're going to be happier in the work that we're doing. There is a shadow side to this that I do want to highlight just very briefly at this point, is that we can become over obsessed or too focused on external self-awareness and worrying about what other people think about us. So there's a tension to be managed about this, because if we are too focused on what people think about us, it may stop us in our tracks. It may get in the way of us performing. It may impact our decision making, and it may really preclude us from putting ourselves out there, being courageous and trying out new things. So there's a real balance to strike between growing that level of external self-awareness, but not being too focused or obsessed by it. So what do we mean? I'm going to start actually firstly with internal self-awareness. And what do we mean by internal self-awareness? Well, I want to suggest that there are a number of aspects to internal self-awareness. So on the slide right now, I've put up the foundations of internal awareness. And these are made up of typically 6 things. So there are values, so the things that we feel are important to us, and shape who we are and the decisions we make in the world. There are our strengths and our weaknesses, so the things we know we're good at and the things we know we're not so good at. And linked to that are our preferences. So there can be things that we're good at, but we don't love doing them, which is an interesting thing to think about, because others may see us as being good for things as well and come to us for that, but they may not be the things we love doing. And all of that relates, doesn't it, to how we show up and whether we're actually able to access our best selves at work. And then the other aspects of it are our motivations. So, what's important to us in our world of work, what's important to us in how we live our lives, for example, speaks to our motivations. And then also there's an aspect of, as we grow and as we develop, our experiences. So all of these contribute to our levels of internal awareness. Now, we can't cover all of those in our webinar today, so I'm going to dive in and spend a little bit of time on values, because for me, it feels like a foundation. It's an anchor, a real anchor to our levels of awareness. So in the next few slides, I'm going to take you through some thinking around our values and our anchors, and invite you to reflect on you and how you show up at work and what's potentially most important for you. So let me take you there. So this slide is adapted from some work by Edgar Schein, who, again, a psychologist, HR expert, and he was looking at careers specifically, about what drives us, what are the values that drive us to behave and perform in the way that we do at work, but also outside of work. So our values drive our behavior. They are driven by our strengths, and they will inform the strengths we use in the workplace and elsewhere in our lives. And they hint at where we will flourish at work. So that's the really important thing about our values. And Schein identified 7 key anchor values that we have as human beings in the world. And the top 7 are on your slide or on your screen right now. So we have expert, so somebody who has a really high value around being an expert, loves being good at something, and will work to become a guru or an expert. Autonomy, people who have autonomy as a number 1 value will have a primary need to work under their own rules and their own steam. Relators will have a desire to connect and create strong relationships with others. And those who have high challenge value are driven to seek constant stimulation and difficult problems to tackle. Those looking for security will want stability and know that they have an income, they have a guaranteed salary coming in at the end of the week and at the end of the month. And those who are driven by having a strong mission will really want to be making a difference in the world and achieve something of value. Those who are driven by creativity will like to be seen as original, creative, and innovative where possible. So for me, for example, when I look at this, I identify really strongly with autonomy. So that's probably my primary value, and that's what drives me. And I know that because when I went out into the world of work originally, I went into big corporate organizations. I spent about 20 years in that world, but I didn't feel like I was flourishing. It was only when I started to do some work on myself and really think about what mattered to me that I realized autonomy was incredibly important. So for me, working under my own steam, I freelance, I consult as a coach and as a psychotherapist. So those are, those are accessible to me because I'm working on my own and I can pick and choose what work I do. So I'm very driven by autonomy as a value. So what I'm going to invite you to do just right now is have a moment to yourself, just a moment, and then type into the chat the one you most associate yourself with. So if expert, for example, is your number one value, put 1 and expert. And then the one that's the one that you least are attached to. So for example, if security is really unimportant for you, then put that as number 7. So on your own for a moment and then capture in the chat, what's your number 1 and what's your number 7? So I'm just going to give you a moment to do that. Brilliant, thank you for that. So what I'm already seeing from the group we have in here today, a huge variety in what you're putting for number 1. So I see mission, I see expert, I see security, I see challenge, which is really interesting, isn't it? Because here we are, probably working in very similar fields, yet we're coming into it for different reasons. And this is really important when it comes to understanding ourselves better and understanding others. So thank you for sharing that in the chat. You might be saying, well, where's the so what of this? Yeah, I understand my values, great, but how does that help me be at my best at work? Well, they can show up, these values can show up in lots of different ways in the workplace and in our lives in general. And I wanted to just share a brief example with you to bring this to life. So on your screen now, I'm using the expert value anchor as a jumping off point, really. So if I have expert, for example, as my number 1 value, it's the thing that I get out of bed to try and improve in the mornings, then it's going to inform how I show up in the workplace, but also some of my behaviors and what I'm going to favor and what I might overlook. So for example, I might, if this is a really strong value for me, I will potentially be striving for excellence in absolutely everything I do. I will go deep on subject matter and I will become a subject matter expert probably in my technical area. I'll be driving to get to the peak in terms of my technical knowledge. And if I'm thinking about the team I might surround myself with, well, I'm likely to favor people who are very similar to me. So they'll be smart, self-directed, and they'll be really interested in continuous learning. So if autonomy is my number one, expert is probably my number two, and I'm always doing some kind of CPD and development work. And I love having conversations with people about similar things. But what does that mean about who I might be excluding from my team or overlooking when I'm trying to pull a team together, for example? So I might overlook those who are more introverted or those who have less experience than me. I might think, well, they're not experts, or they might value something differently. And that has an impact then on who will be drawn towards me in my world of work and in my personal life as well, and also who might choose not to be part of my team, and indeed who I might choose not to work with. So I'm just going to invite you again. We're not going to have long to think about this, but just start on your own, capture somewhere on a piece of paper your top value and these three statements here. What does this say about me in terms of what's important to me? What might I favor and what might I overlook? And feel free, if you want, to share anything that you feel would be helpful in the chat around that. So if you want to share what it says about you and what you favor, what you might overlook, feel free to do so. There's no obligation, though, to do that. So just a moment or two on your own. What does this say about me? If this is my really strong value, what might I favor? What might I overlook? So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds more. There are some great comments in the chat in relation to this. You're really starting to think about, if this is my number one, what might it mean? So lovely comments from Katie about people pleasing, if I'm a relator, so and the impact that might have. Who might I overlook, for example, if I have a relator as a strong value? People who are more introverted, who have less confidence, for example, might be people I think, oh no, they're not part of my tribe. So the invitation here is to think about the impact this can have on the people around you. Remember, we started our conversation earlier talking about growing our internal awareness and our external self-awareness. So, you know, the values that we have and how they show up and how we relate in the workplace have an impact on how people perceive us as a consequence. And interestingly, some research by Liechtenstein in 2005 is a study of 165 managers. And what they found, I thought was fascinating, was that values that people have was far more a predictor of performance in an organization than tenure, age, or education, which is fascinating to me. So maybe the other thing to think about before we move on from values is to think about maybe a conversation that you found difficult of late in the workplace, where you thought someone was being tricky or difficult. And actually, maybe it's just because you have different values. You value being an expert, they value security, for example. They're really creative and innovative and want to come up with new ideas. You value challenge. So it may be that it's just that you're coming from very different places. So it can be incredibly helpful to think about what I value, my strengths, my values, my self-concept, and the impact that can have on others. And when I hear or I notice myself judging others for being difficult, for example, it could be simply that they have different values. So I'm going to move us on at this stage to think about, which we've been starting to do, which is our external perception. So we've been talking a little bit about internal concepts. So thinking about my values and how they inform how I show up in the world, and what it is I'm trying to put out into the world. Now we're going to start to think about this concept of personal brand, which relates really to our external perception. And you may well have heard of the concept of personal brand. I'm going to talk about this in a moment. But I want to talk firstly about the gap between internal and external perception. And I've captured it here in a slide. And I'm talking about the intention we may go out into the world with and the impact we may have. So, for example, we may kick off a project and have the intention of taking a lead and being really assertive with our project plans. The impact, the unintended consequence of that could be that somebody sees us or perceives us as being arrogant or uninformed because we're racing in with an agenda. So for me, this feels really close to home because I remember when I was back in my corporate career, being appointed into a new position. So I joined a new organization. It was a step up in my career for me, and I was a head of within a department. And in the recruitment process, I had been very tightly briefed that there was a major product development requirement. Once I came in, there was a key strategic problem that the organization had, and it needed a whole review of a product portfolio, pricing, positioning, all that kind of thing. And I remember thinking, this is right up my street. I can't wait. I'm going to go in and I'm loving doing this. And what I was told was that there were some tricky stakeholders in relation to this. And I remember thinking, well, fine. My naivety was kind of, this is fine. I've been there. I can handle it. So quite frankly, I look back now and I think, my goodness, I went in like a bull in a china shop. I was taking the lead, I was being bold, and I was being assertive. And I remember having some initial conversations with someone who was the product owner in this area. He'd been in the organization for 30 years. He was coming close to retirement. And his values and what was important to him at this stage in his career was very different to mine. And me going in, going, brilliant, we're going to turn this upside down. We're going to lose some of this product. We're going to gain something over here, sent him into a tailspin. And he was really defensive because for him, how I came across was really, really strong. He felt really under threat and under pressure, which was never my intention. My desire was to do a great job and achieve the goals and the objectives that were set for me. So I'm just bringing to life this idea of the difference between the intention that we might lead in with on something and the impact we can have. Similarly, we may have the intention of being really knowledgeable, but be scared of making mistakes. And the impact that can have, or how we can come across, is uncommunicative, untrustworthy, or even as a procrastinator if we don't make decisions. We might also have the intention of leading our team by being helpful and supportive. How the team can perceive it is possibly as micromanaging and untrusting. So it's really important to start to think about, what's the intention I have? How is that landing with people? And that's the piece about growing our levels of external awareness, seeking feedback on a regular basis with people to see how this is landing. So all of that speaks to our external perception, how people perceive us in the world, otherwise known as our personal brand. And I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about personal brand, what it is, what makes it up, what makes up a personal brand, and what can we do to have an impact on that, for example. So before I go there, what I'd love you to do right now is just take a minute to capture on that piece of paper again 3 words that, if I were in a room with people you work with, they would use to describe you. So be honest with yourself right now, and nobody else needs to see this. You don't need to put it in the chat, but capture for yourself 3 words, just 3 words, that people would use if I asked them to describe you. So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds or so for that, and we'll talk about what personal brand is. So they may say you're really empathic, caring. You might say you're really driven, fun, humorous, resilient, all sorts of things. So capture for yourself. And if you want to share them with us in the chat, feel free to. You don't have to, but you're equally very welcome to. Thank you, Manila. You shared honest, supportive, and approachable. 3 lovely words. Matala, reliable. Okay, so holding that aside for a minute, we're not losing sight of our values. Our values and our strengths are at our absolute core. These are the things that make us tick. They're the things that help us inform the career pathway we take, the decisions we take about our world of work. But what others experience of us and how they see us is what we describe as personal brand. So I'm going to put 4 statements up on the screen right now, and I'm going to invite you to respond on these as to whether you think they are true or false. So 4 statements. Firstly, personal brand is a way to deliver value to others and leave a positive impression. Do we believe that's true or false? If you think it's true, pop true in the chat. If you think it's false, pop false in the chat. So we've got a mix of true or false. It is in fact true. So it is. So this is not about PR. This is not about performance without substance, but this is a way of thinking about how can I deliver really well. So deliver value to others and leave a positive impression. So this is what we're meaning by personal brand. So it's not at the expense of performance, but it is saying that how we deliver that performance might be really important. Second point here, not everyone has a personal brand. True or false? So yes, we're largely in agreement that it is indeed false. Everyone does have a personal brand. Even if we're not going out of the way to try to have a personal brand, we do have one. And if I can just bring this to life, if you think about someone you work with right now, a leader in the organization, someone you admire, someone you aspire to be like, I bet you can easily, in the same way as you did it for yourself, you could easily capture 3 words that describe that individual and what they, the image they have in the world. So, and you might even want to do that right now. You might want to think about Sam, whom you work with. What are 3 words you would use to describe that individual? That is personal brand, whether we like it or not. So we have an impact on people in our world of work, in our friendship groups, at home. And that is, in essence, our personal brand. My third comment up here, personal brand involves inventing an identity and that should say identity from scratch. So I've popped up here straight away that this is false, because I think this is a really important one for us to think about. Personal brand is not about throwing out all of your values, all your strengths, all your weaknesses, and starting from scratch when you start a new job. Because even if you go into a new job and you've interviewed for it, people will have formed a view of you already. They will have words to be able to capture what they're expecting of you. So this is not about having to start from scratch on your personal brand. Actually, by contrast, it's more about thinking about what values do I want to put out there in the world? What's important to me that people are saying about me going forward in my working life and my personal career? And then the final one here, personal brand can change as you gain new experience. Again, in the chat, capture for me, is that true or is it false? I think we're in unanimous agreement. It is absolutely true. It will, of course, change as we gain new experiences. So you may have had a view that you are not at all courageous, for example, and then a big challenge came along in your life, or you took on a new project at work. You will have developed and grown from that, and actually you may learn from it that you are indeed courageous, and others, because of their experience of you, will see that and perceive that as so. So that will again grow and develop your personal brand. So absolutely true that we can change as we gain new experiences, which is fantastic. So carrying on our conversation about personal brand, let's talk about what has the greatest influence on our brand. So 3 things. This comes from some work by Harvey Coleman in his book Empowering Yourself. It's an old book, but it's no less relevant today. And he suggests that the 3 main factors that influence our personal brand are the following: performance, so the quality of our work; image, what people think of you; and exposure, how well you and your work is perceived across the organization. So performance, image, and exposure. Quality of your work, what people think of you, and how your work is perceived across the organization. What I'm going to ask you to do right now in the chat is, out of 100%, put in the chat the percentage you think is appropriate for each of these. So if you think it's a third, put 33, 33, 33 in the chat as percentages. If you think performance is the most important thing and it makes up about 60 or 70%, put that first, and then whatever you think for image or exposure. So capture in the chat right now the percentages you think have the greatest influence on our personal brand. We've got a few people going for a third each. We've got 20, 20, 40 when it comes to performance, image, and exposure, 25, 50, 25, 40, 40, 20, lots of a third, performance. We're quite split. A lot of us are thinking performance 50, image 20, exposure 30. Brilliant, keep them coming. 40, 30, 30. Fabulous. All right, I'm going to do the big reveal. So it's not even. It's not 30, 30, 30 or 33, 33, 33. It is, in fact, the following. Performance, when it comes to personal brand, 10%. Image, 30%. And exposure, which is the degree, how our work is perceived across an organization, 60%. I don't think any of us got that in the chat, so this may be coming as a surprise. Now, before we all raise our arms in disagreement, this is not saying that performance is not important. What this is really saying is, when it comes to our personal brand and what people will say about us, performance is not enough. It's a given. And it kind of makes sense, I guess, if I was thinking about the world of clinical world, clinical academic world, academia in general, you look around and you've got lots of high performers in your world. Everybody's doing a great job. And therefore, how do you differentiate? Because if everyone's doing a great job, when it comes to promotions, how do people decide? And it's unfortunately the truth. We might not like it, but the truth is that when it comes to personal brand and our perceptions by others in the world, it is made up of performance is a given. It's the thing that gets you on the slate. It gets you on the list, on the short list. After that, it's how you're perceived, how your work is perceived. So that's the exposure aspect of it. And what people are saying about you in general from an image point of view. So what people think about you. So that's a sobering thing to be thinking of, particularly if, for example, you're at the middle stage of your career and everything you've been focused on to date has been doing a brilliant job. Well, I'm here to tell you that there's more to getting to the next level. So when it comes to building our personal brand, the things to be thinking about are to what extent is our work, to what extent do we have access to other people around our organization? Is our work getting the exposure it needs? And, what would people say about us? So what's my network look like? Have I got a small network? Have I got a wide network? If I've got a small network and people are talking about me in a really positive way, brilliant. But is that enough? Do I need more people to be talking about me in a really positive way? And all of this relates back to us being at our best. Because if people perceive us to be great at what we're doing, they're likely to invite us to apply for other grants, roles, opportunities in general. And when we step into those, we get the opportunity to shine and be at our best. So it's all related. So what do I want to say about this before we move off personal brand and talk about a few other things very briefly, is I'm just going to ask you right now, you captured a few moments ago 3 words that you thought people would say about you if I were in a room with them right now. What I'd love you to do right now is to capture 3 words that you'd like people to be saying about you in a year, 18 months' time. And then start to think about, after today, what might I need to be doing? What work might I need to be doing in terms of my external image and the perception of my work elsewhere in order for people to be saying that about me? So just a moment on your own. 3 words or phrases I'd like people to be saying about me in 12 months' time, before we move on and start to talk about well-being and resilience very briefly. I love that, Tara. Knowledgeable, hardworking, and dependable. Benjamin, strong, effective, and dependable. Strategic, confident, communicator, credible, trustworthy, dependable. I love it. So if those are your words, how well do you think you're doing at that right now? If it's brilliant, do more people need to know about it, which is the exposure aspect? Or if you're thinking, actually, I need to dial up on some of these things, what would that look like going forward? So really an invitation to come back to that when the webinar finishes today. And relating to that, I wanted to talk about stress and optimal levels of performance, just very briefly, because we could spend forever and a day talking about this as well. But I wanted to talk about the balance between performance, stress, and anxiety. And I just wanted to share this slide with you, which comes from, it's a graph which comes, it's adapted from Hans Sellier's work, again, an old piece of work, but no less relevant, from 1956. And this is the eustress, de-stress graph. And what Sellier says, and I'm imagining you will know, I really recognize myself in this, that in order to perform at our best, so that optimal performance and flourishing, we need a particular level of stress or anxiety in our world, as well as the level of work that we have. So And I know for myself, for example, I need a deadline to be able to access really great work within myself. So that produces a little bit of a stress or anxiety for me. So what Cellier says is that when we have low levels of stress and anxiety, we can be lethargic and languish rather than be high performing. We may have very little motivation to get our head down and think about that paper we need to write, or that piece of research proposal we need to write. We might get a bit bored, and we might not progress in the same way as we want to. Equally, at the other side of the scale, if we've got way too much going on, and the stress levels are too high and the workload is too high, then what we will tend to notice is that we start to feel overwhelmed or distressed. Our emotions tend to be more peaks and troughs. We might notice negative self-talk. Imposter syndrome might kick in. We start to go, oh, there's no way I can do that. And our emotional EQ, or ability to be empathic, compassionate, or there for others can disappear. Yeah. So there is an optimal level of stress, stroke anxiety that we need in order to perform at our best. And this is what Cellier calls eustress. So it's that balance between a reasonable level of stress and anxiety and the task or the goals that are set for us. So just a brief invitation to maybe think about where you might be on this curve in the last week or so, and what impact that might be then having on your external brand. So something to think about. So again, just going to give you 30 seconds, less than that, even 10 seconds, just to think about, where am I on the graph? Am I below or beyond the optimal performance and flourishing peak on this graph? And if so, what might I need to do about that? What intervention might I need to take today around that? I might need to give myself a break. I might need to be a little bit more compassionate. And if I'm feeling overwhelmed and distressed, and I feel like I'm on the edge of this curve right now, my biggest intervention suggestion for you would be to go and talk to someone about it, and to reach out to someone that you feel you trust and would be there for you, just to have a conversation, because even having a conversation and articulating it out loud can be helpful. So really important one to think about. Thank you, Christina. Giving yourself a break is really important. Okay, so a few more things to think about. I know I'm barely scratching the surface on, in particular, this, but I wanted to talk finally about 3 things that we can do to help improve our levels of internal and external self-awareness. And these are the following. Firstly, you may have come across some work by Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K, where she talks about this concept of having a growth mindset. I have done lots of work with NHS clinicians, clinical academics, and academics over the years. And the one thing I do know about them is they are really tough on themselves. They set themselves really high standards, often striving for perfection, which is amazing. I am lucky we have those kind of people in our world. However, that can start to increase the levels of stress we have, and because we are prone to have a negativity bias, which is what this 5:1 ratio relates to on my slide right now. You may have come across the work of Gottman. So he's a relationship psychotherapist. He and his wife have a big institute in the States. And what Gottman would say is that because of our negativity bias, for every negative interaction we have in the world, we need 5 positive ones to compensate for it. And I really recognize this in my life. So I may be front of room with a leadership group talking about their development for 2 or 3 days. And by and large, the feedback can be fantastic. And one person talks about one thing that they weren't really happy about in the workshop. And I can absolutely focus in and zero in on that for days afterwards. That's my negativity bias in action. And it's helpful in some ways because it's making me think, how can I improve for next time? But it's also meaning I'm ignoring all of the good stuff. And what Carol Dweck talks about is this concept of having a growth mindset, which in practical terms is simply the following. if you catch yourself saying, I'm no good at that, how Carol brings this to life is to add yet at the end of that statement or phrase. I'm not good at this yet is a growth mindset. It's likely to spur me on to try again, to improve my performance, to get better at something, rather than have me go, I'm never going to do this again. I failed at it. I fell off the bicycle. I'm no good at running. I'm not going out there. I'm not great at it yet means I might actually go back out in the world and try it. So maintaining a growth mindset can be really important to help on our levels of self-awareness, because it means we're going to try out those new experiences. Remember, we talked about those. They can inform our levels of self-awareness, and we can grow and develop ourselves and build strength in other areas. The other thing we can do to help ourselves is to gather feedback. Now, this doesn't mean this isn't about going out there and being really needy with people, but it is actually about saying, look, I'm trying to improve. I'm trying to increase my levels of awareness. I'm thinking about my impact in my work. I want to be better at presenting. Could you give me some feedback from that session I ran last week? People are normally really delighted to give you feedback. And if you anchor it in the why you're doing it, then it's not going to come across as needy. It's going to come across as this person is really seeking to develop themselves. And then the final thing to think about in relation to this that can help is the importance of creating realistic goals. We are living in a crazy, complex world. The problems we are dealing with in the workplace, in the world in general, are more complex than they have ever been. And it isn't always easy to see a pathway through to solving some of these problems. So the invitation is to start small, to break things down into really tiny steps that move us towards those goals, rather than thinking, oh my God, how do I get to that goal, without thinking about the small steps. If I were thinking about a piece of research that's relevant to this, I'm thinking about the UK Olympic cycling team. And some work by David Brailsford from the British cycling team, and he came up with the concept of marginal gains, and that's what they set out to do when they were developing the British cycling team for the Olympics in 2008 and 2012. This concept of marginal gains, making tweaks to performance, making tweaks to the bicycles, making tweak to the training that people were doing, helps them move to getting 8-10 gold medals at the 2008 and the 2012 Olympics from really poor performance before that. The UK Olympic rowing teams equally carved out this concept again of, will it make the boat go faster? What's the first step that we can do to help the boat go faster? There's even a book called out if you want to look it up. Will it make the boat go faster? Is driving the first step I need to take that will take me towards my goal. So 3 core things: maintain a growth mindset, gather feedback, and create realistic goals can help improve our levels of self-awareness, which will in turn help us move towards being our best at work. So to summarize, before we break for some questions right now, what have we been talking about today? 5 key areas that can help us be at our best at work. And I want to say in life in general. Firstly, building self-awareness. What strengths and values, preferences make you, you? So really knowing that side of things. Secondly, we talked about cultivating your personal brand. What do you want to be known for? What do you want people to be saying when you're not in the room? Yeah. And then maintaining a growth mindset. So how can you shift your mindset to a more positive way of thinking, rather than I'm no good at that, I'm no good at that yet. Then gathering feedback. Who can you ask personally and professionally to better understand how others see you? So gather that feedback. Tell people why you're doing it. Not just that you're randomly seeking feedback, but I'm wanting to grow in this particular area. Can you give me some feedback? What is it that I'm doing really well? What could I do more of, less of, or do differently, for example? So you can even give them a structure on that. And then create realistic goals. Will it make the boat go faster, that 1%, that marginal gain? And how can you break your goals down into manageable steps? So that's our summary. Before we take some questions, you will have in your handout or your takeaway some other articles to read. So I really encourage you to go away and have a read of those. And some also Tasha Urich's podcast on engaging and growing our self-awareness, as well as the TED radio hour on changing ourselves for the better. Also some things to watch, like taking steps towards your future potential using strengths. That comes from the amazing Trudy Bateman at Capfinity and Sue Langley. Okay, I'm going to pause it there for now. And Lucy, I think you might have some questions for us. I'm just going to stop sharing. So Lucy, why can't I hear you?
Thank you, Jean. I was on mute. That always happens.
I thought it was me.
No, it's definitely me. Thanks, Jean. I was just saying thank you so much for delivering such a powerful and interactive session. And it was great to see everybody engaging in the chat box and things like that. Yeah, I've really enjoyed kind of observing this past hour. We will open up the Q&A now, conscious of time. There is still time to send in some questions if you do have any. And you can also upvote any questions that you might like to see answered by clicking on the thumb icon in the Q&A section as well. So I'll go to the most upvoted question and let's see what we've got. So first question for you, Jean, is how can I learn more about my strengths? Also, how can I encourage my team and colleagues to do the same?
Oh, really good question. Do you know, a really simple starting point for this is a bit of self-reflection, actually. If we all have a to-do list, don't we? And if you went down through your to-do list and you looked at that kind of quite objectively and went, well, what do I feel really excited about? And what do I think, oh gosh, I'm really not looking forward to that. That in itself informs us what we're energized by and what we're likely to be drained by, which speaks to our strengths, because there'll be things that we'll be going, yeah, can't wait to do that thing, which is probably because I have a strength in that and I love doing that. Or I'm going to put that thing off because that probably de-energizes me. So that in itself is a good way of understanding our strengths better. And sharing that, your piece around the how does my team do it as well. I guess it's the sharing what you learn from that exercise with others about yourself, but also back to this point around seeking feedback. You know, ask people what they notice you are really energized by and what they see you do really well, because that will speak to your strengths. So observing each other, giving each other feedback, if you have a safe culture that you feel you're able to do that. In a team meeting, what's gone well and I'm really proud of this week. Again, that will speak to your strengths. So having some space for that is probably a really good starting point, Lucy.
Thank you, that's perfect. We will swiftly move on to the next question. So the next, by far actually, that's come quite high on the upvotes is I am an introvert by nature. And I've always relied on my performance to show my potential and knowledge. I'm unsure how to gain exposure without pushing myself too far out of my comfort zone. Do you have any tips for how to do this?
Good question. And what I would say is nobody wants you to be pushed outside your comfort zone to the extent that you feel really uncomfortable. Yeah, so that's the starting point. So what I would say is back to this piece about what's really important to me. I would be thinking about how do I do this in a way that feels really authentic for me? And probably a good way of thinking about it is if I look around and I see people I really admire in the world, and I admire how they put themselves out there and how they do it. I'd be tempted to go and have a conversation with them about how they do it, especially if you think, well, they seem quite introverted as well. I'd go and find out about it. But I would also think about doing it in a way that feels appropriate for you. So for some people, they love the spotlight. They're going to be front of room wherever there's an opportunity, and they're going to get the exposure. For others, it's actually writing a paper and ensuring that paper goes out into the world and more people see it. So do it in a way that's authentic for you. And then the final thing I'd probably say to this, Lucy, is if anybody wants a book to read, not that we all need any more books, but there's a book called The Alter Ego, which is really interesting on this subject. It's the idea of developing an alter persona, which is still really authentically you, but is you dialed up by maybe 5 or 10%. The idea is that you can go out and be that person for whatever it is, the event that you need to go to, but then you can come away and refresh, recharge. So recognizing that if you are an introvert, I can do it in small bursts rather than I have to be out in the world and putting my work out there all the time. Choose selectively about events, activities, conferences, meetings that are important to you, and challenge yourself a little bit, but not to the extent that you feel so uncomfortable that you're outside your comfort zone, because that's not a safe place and it's a stressful place.
Perfect. Thank you, Jean. I think that's a really important one to address, isn't it, as well? And obviously resonated with the group in terms of the upvoting there. So we've got the next question. It's from Anne in the Q&A box. How important is exposure to personal brand if you're not aiming to be promoted and are perhaps happy in the position that you're in, looking at it from that perspective in terms of maybe it's not from the perspective of wanting kind of career growth as such, but yeah.
It's a really good question. Yeah. What would I say? I think it's still important because I guess if you're happy in where you are for probably reasons that the work you're doing is satisfying, it's getting enough exposure at the moment, so that's what's contributing to the happiness. If, however, you start to be leapfrogged by others and your work becomes less important or sidelined, how would the concept of that make you feel? And if it would start to make you feel uncomfortable, then giving some time and energy to the exposure aspect of personal brand is probably important, so that you're not forgotten about. Because you can be, if the person that has a head down doing the work can be overlooked in general when it comes to, I guess I was thinking about organizational change. And if we're not visible to others and we're not seen, there's a risk, isn't there, that when organizational change comes along, it may be perceived that our area is not important. So there is something about ensuring our relevance, probably more than anything else in our world of work. So I guess the short answer is we needed to maintain our relevance in our world of work, because we're in such a fast-moving world of work and in life in general that very quickly things can become obsolete, and we don't want to be one of those.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jean. We will move on very quickly, just conscious of time. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions and then we'll have to wrap it up. So we've got, how can you manage relationships with your manager and wider team on projects or just day-to-day interactions if your value anchors differ greatly?
Great question. And I have this conversation lots with academics, particularly those who are moving into leadership roles, because what tends to happen when we're working in teams is we're very focused on the task and the goals and the deadlines, and we've got Gantt charts and we're ragging them and we're talking about the progress. We're not necessarily talking about how we're working together. And particularly when we're under stress and under pressure, we can rub each other up the wrong way every now and then. So I always encourage people to take time out in their teams, in their project groups or whatever, to talk about impact on each other, what you value, what you take for granted, and how, I suppose, it's negotiate around that, Lucy, around, well, okay, I value this and you value that. What happens if we clash? How are we going to manage that? And actually to be able to talk openly about that builds psychological safety, but also means that we start to respect and value each other for the individual strengths that we're bringing into a team. So we can work really well together despite the fact that we have different values, so long as we acknowledge that in each other and we're able to see the value that each person brings to a team. Does that answer the question, do you think? Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you. I think it's that thing, isn't it? Especially that psychological safety piece, so important in terms of managing and maintaining those team dynamics and valuing each other as well. Absolutely. So we'll just have one more and then we'll close the session, but it's been brilliant. Somebody has asked, which I think is a really interesting one actually, can we have different personal brands in different situations? For example, they're a student and they hold multiple jobs and they feel that they're seen perhaps differently in all three places.
Oh, that's a good one. So I suspect that might relate to the to two things actually. Well, actually, it probably relates to all of them, and in a roundabout way, we potentially can, because depending on the jobs we're doing as a student, we're going to be displaying different strengths. Yeah. So on the strengths aspect, the image, so what people might be saying and the kind of exposure our work gets could be different in each of the different areas. However, what's probably likely to remain the same is our values and what motivates us. So that will come through consistently. It might just be that the task you're on only allows for you to demonstrate certain skills and strengths, but the way you go about it, which will be informed by your motivation and your values, will shine through wherever you are.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jean. That was really lovely and a great session as well. So hopefully everyone has found this webinar beneficial and feels able to implement some of the behaviours that we've explored today as well. All of our past webinars can be found on the NIHR TV YouTube channel under the Development and Support Webinars playlist, and you'll find a link to this in the chat box as well. We'll also bob some links in the chat box for our online leadership e-learning modules on NIHR Learn, and they're available for anybody working in health and care research to utilise. We will also add a link to our NIHR Academy events page too, so you can be kept up to date with up and coming events. So thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And as always, if you've got any questions or queries, you can contact a member of our development and support team at the email address provided in the chat box. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.